Feel
Yes.
free to feel free to put questions in, I guess the chat, right? Is where they would put questions. Is that correct? I think
Yeah, I
so.
can monitor that.
Great. Okay. Super. So, as I said, macro is one of my passions, and I lived in Atlanta, born and raised there, trying to lose the accent. And while I was in Atlanta, I had a backyard garden, as you see here, where I had a lot of potted plants that I could move around, as well as some that were planted. But the advantage of having potted plants was that I could control, subject background distance, change the background, change the lighting, et cetera, and do more sort of tabletop type macro. But anyway, there's a lot that you can discover right in your own kitchen, or this time of year, of course, trying to do macro in the backyard can be challenging with the cold temperatures. But I'm going to show you some ideas of things you can do, setups indoors that I think will really excite a lot of you. And I love this mantra here, spend an hour with a flower. And that really is something that I preach a lot. Like, it's not enough just to take one photo of a flower or really any subject when you're doing close ups. It's a slow, almost meditative experience where you really are slowing down, looking at all the fine details of something. And it's almost like, if you know Nancy Rotenberg, she was a mentor of mine, and she talks about going beyond the handshake. So she talks about how when you first approach a subject, such as a flower, it's sort of like you shake their hand, you get to know them and whatever. But she encouraged people to go beyond just the handshake and really start playing with different camera angles, different lighting, different compositions, all of that sort of thing, different lenses, and really get to know intimately your subject. So that's what we're going to talk about, is how to make close-ups that aren't just a documentary image of, here is a flower, for instance. This one is a great example, of course, of shallow depth of field. I shoot Nikon, but I also shoot Olympus, so I kind of have a dual personality at the moment. I love the lightweight aspect of the Olympus, but that camera can only do two in-camera multiple exposures. So that's why I've held on to my Nikon, because it can do up to 10 in-camera multiple exposures, which I love. So anyway, but this was made with my 200 macro lens, the Nikon macro lens. It's one of the sharpest lenses Nikon makes. I'm not sure they still make this one. It is a fixed focal length lens, and by opening the aperture, of course, this is probably review for a lot of you, but just for those who are new to macro or just starting out with close-ups, if you use a wider aperture, so something like 5.6 or even 2.8, it's going to blur the background for you. And the amount of blur in that background has to do with how close the subject is to that background. The closer the background is to the subject, even at a real wide aperture, a lot of times you still get detail in that background. So this is why I love putting flowers and plants in pots, so that I can make the distance greater if I need to get that wash of color that I might want. This was a backlit situation outdoors, also, of course. And then this was made in Monet's garden. I had the really unique privilege of taking groups into Monet's garden for 20 plus years. We had private access where we would go in for a couple hours before the garden even opened, and then another 2 hours after it closed. Unfortunately, they won't let me do that anymore. After COVID, things changed. But I have a list of at least probably 50 people that would love to go and do that workshop. So I do keep asking them, can we do this? Is it possible? And they say it's not, but I will keep asking until they say yes. But in front of Monet's house, they have these wonderful tulips. And I worked really hard not only to get the right camera angle here, positioning the camera in just the right spot so that the red of the other tulip behind there would be in front or behind the white curl of the petal there. And I wanted to just isolate the curl because that to me was the most exciting part of the flower. So when you approach any subject, especially with a flower, ask yourself, what's turning me on? What's really exciting about this? And try and get specific in your mind of what that is. And that way you can have a clearer vision as you approach the subject and try and translate it into pixels. And this again was also made with shallow depth of field, and it was that 200 macro lens. And I just focused on the edge of that petal. I didn't want the rest to be sharp, and your mind can kind of fill in the rest of it. And then I'm also a big fan of wide aperture when you move the camera off axis. So this was a fern where if I had tried to get the camera parallel, the back of the camera parallel to that fern, all those little pieces of the fern would have been much sharper. But I deliberately turned the camera at an angle so that just the middle part would kind of be sharp. This almost looks like it could have been made with a lens baby. We'll talk about lens baby in a minute, but it was just the straight macro lens and turning the camera at an acute angle. And photography is a performance art. It's just like dance or music or any other sort of art form. Practice makes perfect. You just have to keep practicing and practicing. And the more you do this, the deeper you're going to be able to see, and the more you're going to slow down and notice things and be able to strengthen what I think is a muscle. It's a legitimate muscle that we all have, and that's our visual muscle. Here's another one where I was looking straight up. I did not use a tripod in this situation. I've found lately, and maybe part of it is because I've used the phone, maybe it's just my age, getting older and not wanting to bother as much with the tripod. But I really am a big fan of the tripod in my workshops. I always try to do at least one photo session where everybody has to use one because it forces you to really look at all the edges of your frame and carefully compose instead of just kind of walking up and taking a more or less a snapshot. But in this case, I was on the ground looking up, and so I didn't use the tripod. I used my face sort of to steady the camera, and I used a real wide aperture. In this case, it was probably wide open. It's not a lens baby, but because of the optics of that lens and the distance that the other flowers were behind there, it just created this wonderful sort of mushy blur. Now, some of you may not like this look, and that's fine. I just really am turned on by it and love the look of that. All right, so another way to do macro that you might not have thought of is to use a telephoto lens. So those of you who are just beginning to maybe dabble in macro and don't have a dedicated fixed focal length macro lens, you might consider getting your telephoto lens out and trying this technique. So this is where you set up something that's got color in the foreground. In this case, of course, it's that basket of flowers. And then you open your lens all the way. So in this case, I think it was at 2.8. This is my 70 to 200 lens. And then I'm using manual focus and I'm focusing on the tulip there, the orange tulip. And because that aperture is wide open and because I'm using manual focus, you end up getting this wonderful blur of color around your subject. And I call this shooting through. So that's what this is all about. So you could practice this for hours if you wanted to, maybe in your living room, just go get some cut flowers and practice something like this, or do it with some other subject. And you can also hold a single flower up in front of the lens. So this is my 200 macro I spoke about earlier. And I'm just holding this Gerber daisy. Well, actually, I'm letting the plamp hold it. There's this device called a plamp, PLAMP, and it holds flowers still in the wind. Really handy to have that if you're outdoors on a windy day, especially. But anyway, I'm not photographing the petals of this flower here. In this case, I'm just using that as some color to shoot through. I'm aiming my lens at something that's off to the left there that you can't even see. So it's really a cool way of getting a different effect with these images. Here's another one. Again, just focusing on these daffodils. They were probably 20 feet away from me. And then there were these purple flowers in the foreground, real close to the lens. And I used the wide aperture here, and I had to kind of poke around to find just the right spot. And I was able to make this image. Now, I would not call this a macro image, nor would I really even call it a close-up. It's more of kind of an intimate landscape, but I still think these principles apply even to, little landscapes that we're doing here. A macro is kind of a mini landscape if you think about it. Here's another one, very abstract. I love abstracts if you haven't seen already. This was made with a really big, this is like my 2 to 400 lens, a lens that I would normally use for wildlife and things like that. But I set the lens at the 400 millimeter focal length and I got on my knees and I was using a tripod in this case, poking around this cut leaf Japanese maple. And all of a sudden, I was also, while I was poking around, moving the focus in and out. And again, using manual focus, having that aperture wide open. And I just started moving the focus in and out. And all of a sudden, this shape popped out of this curve here, of this branch. And I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. And so I ended up just focusing sharp on that and letting the rest wash into color. So you can do this with a long-ish lens. Now, another technique that I really enjoy is taking a close-up lens like this and putting it on the end of my macro lens. Now, you can use this close-up lens on the end of a macro lens or a telephoto lens, either one. So it's really versatile, especially if you aren't really into macro yet and you think you might, but you're not sure, and you don't want to buy a expensive macro lens. You could just get this filter or close-up lens and start playing with that on the end of a telephoto and getting a focus that's closer than your telephoto would normally focus. It won't give you true one-to-one macro, but it will let you focus closer. Now with the macro lens, it's giving me greater than life size or greater than one-to-one sort of reproduction, if you will. So this one is the plus 5D ProMaster Achromatic close-up lens. They do make one in a smaller magnification, but I like the plus 5. And I got the 77 millimeter one because that is the thread size of my telephoto. So in this case, I'm using an adapter ring. You can see it's like a step down ring there from 62 to, or step up ring, 62 to 77 to allow me to use it with the macro lens. So I would buy, if you're getting this filter, get the largest thread size of whatever your telephoto that you'd be using it with is. I'm not sure it comes larger than 77 millimeters, but I think that's the most you would need if you're doing this anyway. So here it is. This actually, if you wanted, you could buy this through my website. There's a gear section on the website there where you can save a little bit on it. But it's not that expensive compared to a dedicated macro lens, of course. So here are some steps for using this filter or lens. And I put this here because if you bought the lens and screwed it on the end there and started looking through the camera, you'd be like, what is going on here? What was he talking about? All I see is one big blur. So you really kind of need to follow these steps to get the most out of that filter. So you're going to use a long telephoto lens, something that's in the 70 to 300 focal length range. I could try this with my 100 macro or my 200 macro as well. And I showed you that 200 already. So anyway, this needs to kind of be in that long telephoto lens range. And then you're going to take the camera off a tripod if it's on a tripod and use manual focus and set the lens to the minimum focusing distance. So on the barrel of the lens, not so much these days with digital cameras, but if you do have one of the old-fashioned lenses where you can actually see the infinity symbol on that lens, you're going to want to move the lens opposite the infinity symbol. So you want to set it to the closest focus that that lens is capable of. Then you're going to put the filter on, and then while you're looking through the viewfinder, and I really do like looking through the viewfinder as opposed to the back of the camera, you look through the viewfinder and then walk toward the subject. Use your body to get closer. And then when something starts to look sharp, that's where you would put your tripod down or where you would start working from that distance. So unless you set it to manual focus and turn the lens to that minimum focus distance, you're just going to see nothing but a blur through the lens when you first mount that filter. So important to follow these steps. So here's some images I made with that combination of the 200 macro and the 500D close-up lens. And again, I am drawn to abstracts. So this was a rose, of course, and I just wanted to isolate the curls there. If you love, Georgia O'Keeffe and that sort of look or feel with imagery, this is the tool for you to help you achieve this sort of thing. This was an orchid, and all I wanted to do was isolate, that little curl there on the edge of one of the petals of the orchid. And so this was not the first shot I took of this orchid. I will show you a progression later of another shot I did. It takes probably close to an hour for me to get to this level of seeing. You have to just keep going, first shoot it without that filter and then start playing and getting closer and closer and closer. And again, it's like beyond the handshake, learning to get to know the subject like you would a person in great depth. Again, same idea here with this. This was a bird of paradise, and this one I remember it was an entire morning, before I got to this image here. And I do have an ebook that shows you all the images I made up to this point of this one final image that I thought was kind of encapsulated the essence of the subject. So if you like abstracts, for sure that filter is a great tool. This is that same bird of paradise. There's 10 images I could do, with that one flower. And then this one has a whole story behind it. I don't have time to go into it, but that heart was formed there from two petals of a lupin. And I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't really been paying close attention and being open to discovery and just the magic of this whole experience of discovering close-ups to me is what excites me and keeps me going with it. You're always going to see something slightly different every time you look through the lens. Anyway, this was the petals coming together, and I had a blue sweatshirt on. I put that in the background far enough away where you couldn't see, that it was a sweatshirt, and that's what provided that blue color in the background there. But it was, again, the combination of the 200 macro and the 500D close-up lens there. And then this one also, just the edges of this plant, that's all I wanted sharp here. And then this is a tulip, a very different abstract view of a tulip than you would normally see. But I just enjoy discovering. Sometimes I'll pretend I'm a bug, crawling on the flower, and just see what I can see there. This was also inside of a tulip, just another abstract composition. Now, I'm also paying attention, though, just like I would with any landscape photo or other photo, to my elements in the frame and really making sure there are no distractions and using the rule of thirds and, all those things that we would use with other normal photography you want to use when you're doing these kinds of images, too. Now you can also use a wide angle lens to do close-ups. So a lot of you might not have thought of this, but it's a 24 to 70 lens. I don't have a dedicated macro lens. So I would set my lens to the 24 millimeter end of the lens in this case and try and do a close-up with that. Now I could try to just focus close with the 24 millimeters and I'd probably be able to get a few inches away. But one of the tricks here is to put a 12 millimeter extension tube on. So you have the camera and then the extension tube and then the lens. So again, though, I'm at the 24 millimeter end of the lens. So by having that skinny 12 millimeter extension tube, that allows me to focus closer. And so what you get is a subject in its environment, like you see this coneflower here. Were there any questions? I don't want to go too fast. Do you need me to pause here at all, or because I know that 500D filter is a lot to absorb there.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. If anybody has a question, go ahead and unmute yourself. Yeah, this was a lot to absorb.
Yeah, I know, and I don't want to go too fast. Um,
And I've heard of using an extension tube before, but I haven't actually done that.
One of the disadvantages of an extension tube is you lose some light. It's moving, the lens further away from the sensor, but it will magnify. That's the beauty of that 500D lens. It's got edge to edge sharpness, and you don't lose an f-stop, by putting that on the end of your macro lens. So I tend to use that more so than extension tubes.
Well, we're recording this, and so that information about that 500D whatever will be
Right.
there for us to take a look at and maybe try to find something that would fit our cameras
Sure.
and
Sure.
the
Absolutely.
lenses. Okay, so
Yeah.
I guess you could go ahead. I don't think there's any questions right now.
Okay, sure. So back to we were talking about using a wide angle lens. So this is again the 24 millimeter end of that lens with the 12 millimeter extension tube. So it just again makes it really close and gives you your subject with the background as well. I'm almost touching that coneflower there, so it's very close. And same here, you can also do images like this with the wide angle lens. And the so you don't have to run out and get a macro lens if you don't already own one. You can do some macro with your telephoto. Now we talked briefly about lens babies earlier. So a lens baby is a special lens that will give you selective focus on a subject. You can use it to do portraits and landscapes and things like that, but it's also certain lenses that Lens Baby makes have a macro function. And one of them is the Velvet 56. And you can see here, I could focus as close as 5 inches away from my subject using this lens. And it's also an f-stop, the widest f-stop is 1.6. So that's letting a lot of light in. So because of that, it gives you this glow effect when you shoot with this. And when you're looking for lens babies, if you don't already own one, there's so many out there. I recommend you start with the Velvet, either the 56 or the 85. Those are the two focal lengths that they make. And it's a little bit easier to use the Velvet, I think, than some of the other Lens Baby lenses. But anyway, this is the look of the widest, absolute widest aperture there is on the Velvet 56. So, like I said, it's letting a lot of light in, really gives you that glowy sort of effect. It's almost as if you used a soft focus filter, but I just love that beautiful softness. I mean, that's why they call it the Velvet, right? Here's another one at that wide aperture. So if you like this sort of look or feel, check out the Velvet as a tool to help you. And then this, like I said, is the other one they make, the 85. Um, and that one focuses close as well, and it kind of compresses the background a little bit more, I think, than the 56. But anyway, you can see at its widest aperture, f4, what it did here. These were some water lilies at Longwood. They have since redone the water lilies section of Longwood Gardens. I can't wait to see it. Anyway, and then there is another lens if you don't want to get involved with the Velvet that's relatively inexpensive. I think it's under $200, this Sol 45 lens. And this one has a fixed aperture, so you don't have to worry about moving your apertures at all. It's 3.5, and all you do here is just mount it to your camera, and then you can kind of tilt it a little bit. And that's how you get that selective focus look with this lens. And it has these little plastic blades in front of the lens that you see there in the slide on the right. And you can take your finger and move those blades away if you don't want them at all. But it does give you an interesting effect if you shoot through those blades. It's sort of like the idea I was talking about earlier of shooting through. So here's an image where I did shoot through with the blades activated, and you see what it did in the background. Almost made it look like it's raining here. But this was just a little bit different look, for this flower here. And the same here with the blades, just a little more abstract, artsy kind of image. But if you like that, again, another tool to help you do that. And then here's yet another tool. This is a special lens that a guy who does woodworking has made for me. It's got 3 mirrors inside. So it's not really a kaleidoscope because kaleidoscopes have colorful glass inside of them. This is a kaleidoscope, which means that it's just got the 3 mirrors. But essentially, whatever you point this at, it's going to give you a real interesting sort of refracted look. And it has a 62 millimeter thread size on here, but I oftentimes am not mounting it directly to the lens. There's two ways to do it. So here's where it would be mounted directly on the end of in this case, it's the 200 macro lens. And that's great. And you can shoot with it that way. But actually, what I really find myself doing more often is holding it an inch or two away from the lens and shooting through it that way, because that way you can turn it as you look through the camera. It's best to be on a tripod with this. And you can turn the kaleidoscope and get different effects as you turn and shoot different things that way. So here are some images that are made with the kaleidoscope. Yes, you probably could achieve this in Photoshop. It'd take a long time probably because you got to soften all the edges and all that stuff, but it's possible. I enjoy spending more time behind the camera than in, with the post processing, but the post processing is certainly a very important part of what we're doing here. Here's another one. This one just shows, the same flower in three different ways. Or you can take graphic subjects, like this is just a colorful ashtray turned upside down and shot through with that lens. Or even just a single blossom like this. Or this. This was really cool, what Allison did here. So anyway, lots of fun. Another tool. It is on my website if you're interested. And then another tool, this is actually something I've used quite a bit. This is a LED flashlight. It's got 10 different colors built in. This is awesome for straight light painting. So if you do any light painting, this is a great flashlight even just for that. But I'm using it, of course, for macro, and it's got the 10 colors. And I never use the blinking color changing pattern thing, but the solid colors, yes. You could take cellophane, colorful gel or whatever, and just use a rubber band and put it on the end of a regular flashlight if you wanted to. But if you want the luxury of having it all built in, this is another option here. So this is not that flashlight, but a different one. But I want you to get the concept here of what you would do with it. So you can point it straight at a subject. And again, when I'm using this, I'm usually on a tripod doing some sort of setup at home. I've used it in the field before, but it's better, I think, using this at home for some of the effects I'm going to show. So anyway, I can control the lighting more that way and all of that. And then people don't look at you like you're weird either if you're in a public garden doing this. Anyway, so holding it still gives you a certain sort of look, and then also shining it underneath the subject like this can be really interesting. The further away you are, of course, the more diffuse that light is. So you wouldn't necessarily always want to have it super close like this. But I did that just for demonstration purposes. And then this is just to show you kind of the subtle effect. So nothing wrong at all with that top image there. No flashlight on this lovely flower here. But then with the red flashlight, it gave just a little hint of color, and then on the blue you can see there. So it just adds a little artistic touch to your close-ups if you want to mess with using the flashlight. So here's an example with a dahlia, one of my favorite flowers. When you're practicing macro in general, if you're going to do this with flowers, try to pick flowers that have at least probably like 5 or 6 inch diameter. If you're trying to do like a little carnation or something, it's going to be hard to fill the frame with it. Yes, you could do it with extension tubes and that 500D and so forth, but it's easier to start out with just a larger flower like a dahlia or a daisy or even a rose can be good. That way you have enough surface area, so to speak, to work. And in this case, all I did was just move the blue flashlight and paint the center of the flower just a little bit. But most of that beauty was just from Mother Nature. It's unbelievable. Um, and here's another dahlia where I just used a little bit of that blue flashlight on the top part of the flower. It was gorgeous to begin with, but I just thought, what if? I'm always asking, what if? What if I try this? What if I do that? So get in the habit of asking yourself, what if? Here's another one with a little bit of the red flashlight. This was another dahlia, backlit. So anyway, dahlias are great. And then here's one of some bark. This is a peeling bark from a madrona tree. And you can see what it did there with the red and then, or sorry, the blue. This was the blue and then this was the red. So you don't want to necessarily always use it on flowers. It's great for any macro subject. So now we're kind of getting to the meat of a lot of what I was going to share with you. So still teach macro workshops. I did them in Atlanta in my backyard, and now I'm doing them in various other locations. I don't have one scheduled for next year, this year, I mean, but I'm always open to doing this kind of thing with camera clubs. So, anyway, but what you do is these are just objects, all kinds of things, paperweights, everyday household objects, a slice of a geode there, different shells and feathers and all kinds of things, whatever you can think of. And this is a party, so you just try different things. I have this little toolkit a lot of times at the ready. It's got floral wire and it's got glycerin, glycerin, and some fishing line and scissors and tape and all kinds of other things in there that sometimes can come in handy. Putty, there's also some putty in there. And you'll see why I need that in just a minute. So, what I'll do is I have a bunch of glass. Some of it's clear and some of it's textured clear. And then some of the glass that I have is what they call iridescent glass. And I'll explain what that is in just a minute. But anyway, that's some of the tools there that I find myself using. And then I also gather, colorful fabrics and different papers that have textures to them and things like that that might make interesting backgrounds. And then it's just a party. This is that iridescent glass. You might be able to find this at a local stained glass art supply place. If not, let me know because I do ship this to people. It's 16 by 20 is the size, 21. Love the larger size. It gives you more options when you're shooting. But anyway, see if you can find this. You would just ask for iridescent glass. And anyway, I also have a glass stand that people have been buying because a lot of times if you are trying to hold that glass vertical, it's not easy, just and it can break and all of that. So this is showing you what the glass stand does. So you would put the piece of glass in there, and then it's got an adjustable jaw where you turn that wheel to grip the glass, and it even has four rubber feet on the bottom there. But anyway, that's just one idea, and you can use that to hold other backgrounds up too. But if you're doing the glass, a lot of times you want to shoot where the glass is in a vertical position, and I'll show you examples of that in just a second. But this is just to illustrate how the glass itself, that iridescent glass especially, can be a beautiful abstract subject if you want to challenge yourself. And I would shoot this probably at 5 or 6 different apertures, not changing my focus, but just changing my aperture. And you'd be surprised how different the images look when you change the aperture when you're shooting this glass. Um, Here's another one where some ice formed on this piece of iridescent glass. I left it outside and it was nature's art right there, waiting for me to photograph. You can also take a piece of clear glass. This was a piece of clear glass that had bubbles already etched in it. And I put that in front of a subject, and you can see the subject in each drop there. But I have a much better, more effective technique for this that I'm going to show you in just a minute. So stand by for that. Here's another one, just, playing around with abstracts. This is just the iridescent glass behind a piece of clear glass that has the bubbles already etched in it. So this is training your eye, even if you never do much with these images, I think everybody ought to, at least at some point in their photography journey, uh, experiment some with macro because it's going to make you a better portrait photographer, a better architectural photographer, a better, photographer in general, because it's really making you slow down and see more carefully than you might ordinarily see. This was a piece of clear glass that already had this pattern in it, and then I just put some color behind it. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's so much that you can do with all this, and you're going to discover things I might not have even thought of. So I can't wait to see images from your upcoming photo challenge. It sounds like there's going to be some exercises you can do that they're going to talk about after I finish speaking. But anyway, so here's the piece of iridescent glass. And all I did with this one was I hated to cut the stem because the passion flower is one of my all-time favorite flowers. But I cut the stem and just put it on top of that piece of iridescent glass and made an image. Like that's all that is. But it looks like it's floating in water and, like there was this real elaborate setup. I did this outdoors under soft overcast light. That's usually the best kind of light for soft, or I mean, for close-ups. and sometimes you do want sun if you're trying to get a subject that's backlit or side lit and that sort of thing. But in general, the best light is going to be that soft overcast. And people asked if I use flash. I rarely use flash when I'm doing close-ups. I just love natural light so much that even if it's a window scene, or set up at a window in the winter or on a kitchen table, I'll try to just use the available light there. But there are these little things called Luma cubes. I'm going to talk about them later in the presentation, and those can be really cool for lighting, as well as the flashlight I showed you there, of course. Anyway, there's the passion flower, and I decided to spend an hour with that flower. So I turned it on its side. I have a little spray bottle. I sprayed it with some water and made this image with very shallow depth of field. Just, I was interested in how that might look, the colors and the textures there. Another one here where I move the camera in a different angle. You get the idea here of like working your subject. Just try to see how many different images can I make of this one flower. And then this is shooting straight down over the flower. Those are just the two petals laying flat there on top of the glass, and all I did was spray that glass with water, and it just made an even different look. So it's endless. It really is. And that's what's so exciting and fun about all this and why I love teaching it too. Here's another one of that iridescent glass where this is a fun thing where, those in Christmas time, they do make these ornaments sometimes, or I've even seen jewelry where it's these leaves that have been hollowed out, all the veins have been hollowed out, and they dip the leaf in copper. So it's a copper leaf, and I've got it leaning here at a 45-degree angle, and I'm using that putty I talked about earlier, why you would need putty. And I'm aiming my lens in the leaf itself, the reflection that's there on the glass at the bottom part of this frame. And so, filling the frame with just that reflection of that leaf, I was able to get this image. So, and I don't have preconceived ideas a lot of times. I'll just play and experiment and keep asking, what if? And then these images just kind of like appear when you're open and just have that playful attitude. Instead of saying, I got to get that leaf shot that Charles got, like just let go of that idea, open yourself to playing, and the magic will happen. Trust me, it will. Nothing wrong with trying to get that leaf shot I got, but you know what I'm saying here, I think. Anyway, so here's a situation where I really prefer having the glass vertical because I'm trying to get the reflection of this flower here and the flower standing up in front of the glass. But what I'm really photographing here is just the reflection of that flower. And so here's the image that I made with that setup. So, it's definitely going more into the abstract realm when you do this, but I just love, love, love this type of glass. Here's another one of a coneflower reflected in that iridescent glass. And the fun thing about this too is you can play around with different apertures and get different amounts of sharpness with what your subject is. I recommend that you are on a tripod when you're trying this, by the way. And these could be done with a telephoto lens as well. It doesn't have to be a macro lens. Here's another one, just the back of a leaf, or I mean, not the back, but a different piece of glass here showing the front of that flower. And then here's the back of that flower. So don't forget the backs of flowers. They're just as nice. Here's another one of just a reflection of that flower. So you can see why I love that glass. It's just really cool. Or even, this is a shell reflected in that glass. So tons of fun. Maybe the club could buy a large sheet and then everybody take turns playing with it. Here's another one, just a shell reflected in that glass. This is actually an iPhone image here. And I will touch on the iPhone at the end here. Anyway, so older cameras have the depth of field preview button. You don't need this if you're shooting mirrorless, but anyway, it's great to utilize that if you're shooting a really old camera that's got that depth of field preview button. But what this does is when you press that button, it's stopping the lens down to whatever aperture you chose and giving you a preview of kind of how much depth of field there's going to be in your shot. So it was a really great thing on these older cameras, and we don't have it anymore, of course. But this is just to show you how using this piece of glass with these flowers reflecting, the vast difference you get when you change apertures. I focused on the, I think it was just on the surface of the glass here, or maybe I focused underneath the surface, so to speak. Sometimes I pretend the glass is like the surface of a lake, and you want to focus past the surface or of the lake. So you want to go underneath and focus there. But anyway, it really doesn't matter that much where you focus. The point here is I did not move the focus in all three of these shots I'm about to show you. All I did was just change the aperture. So that there's f4, there's f11, and there's f16. And of course, I'm using aperture priority. When I say I changed the aperture, I didn't bracket the exposures. I just used aperture priority and changed the aperture setting, and the camera automatically chose a shutter speed that would correspond. So if I put those three together, you really can see how stopping the lens down can really change kind of what you get with that effect. Then you can also play around with a clear piece of glass and put the subject behind it and then have a second glass stand behind. This was an older glass stand that I used to sell, but now I have that better design one. But anyway, the point here is you get the flower close to the surface of that clear glass. The camera's off to the right. I'm focusing on the surface of the clear glass. I'm not focusing on the flower, focusing on the glass, and then you end up getting a shot like this, kind of. So tons of fun to find textured, clear textured glass too. Places that have shower door glass, scraps of that laying around maybe or whatever, a good resource for that. So, and then this, it looks like I shot these in ice, but they weren't in ice. I was nice and toasty while I shot these. And then here's another one, and this definitely was that texture. It's kind of the classic texture you would see on a shower door. Photograph in your shower, if you got glass like this, have a party, photograph in the shower. I mean, nothing wrong with it. It's glass, it's there, it's ready for subjects. Anyway, all right, and then here's another idea that happened. Again, I didn't have this as a preconceived shot here. I was playing around one day on a sunny day. This was a sunny day, and I got this paper out that it's called holographic paper, and it has these rainbow um, colors in it. You have to have a direct light source that hits the paper to see the rainbows of color. But anyway, so I was looking at this leaf here, the copper leaf, and I put that paper behind, and I had the macro lens on, and I focused on the surface or the veins of the leaf. I'm not focused on the background there. I'm focused on the leaf, and I'm using that putty to put the leaf, parallel to the back of the camera. You want to have it parallel because that gives you the maximum sharpness. And that's what I wanted in this case. I didn't want selective focus here. I wanted sharpness. So you want to have parallel. And then this was the image I ended up seeing through the camera when I made that image. So it never would have happened though if I hadn't have said, what if? I tried a boring green background before this and another one that was, I don't know what color, but blue maybe. But then I was like, what if? What if I use that holographic paper? So just proof that, you can keep going and discover things. Then here's another discovery. Oh my gosh, this is really fun. A lot of you might have tried this before or heard about it or seen images like this. But anyway, this is not my original idea. I don't even know who came up with it originally. But what you do is you get Rain-X, which is used, of course, to repel the water off of our windshields of our car. And you get a piece of plain glass. So that's just a piece of plain glass there. And I'm sitting it on top of four, in this case, four bricks. It could be for milk jugs or just anything that's kind of the same height. You don't want it to be too much taller than about 14 to 16 inches. Anyway, so I've got that piece of glass on there and I've treated the piece of glass with the Rain-X. So this is a liquid form of Rain-X you see in that bottle there. They do sell it in a spray form. Either one is fine. The main thing to remember is you apply the Rain-X and then you use a paper towel to dry it. And when you dry it, you want to make sure you can't see anything. It just looks like a piece of clear glass like you started with. So you do that first, and you only have to treat the top side of it. You don't have to do the bottom side. And then the last step here is we're going to put a subject underneath. And we've got, knowing the complementary colors, of course, blue and yellow. I had this blue background, piece of cloth with this yellow sunflower, and I put the flower in this drinking glass so that it would stay in position for what I was doing. And I made sure that the diameter of that flower was bigger than the drinking glass. Otherwise, you would have seen the drinking glass, in the shot. But the camera's shooting straight down over this flower, of course. And then you're going to spray the piece of glass with plain water. You don't use glycerin or anything like that. Just spray it with plain water. And what's going to happen is all the water droplets are going to bead up because that's what Rain-X does. And then you'll aim the camera straight down and be able to see the subject in every single water drop. And it is a really fun party. I've seen this done with all kinds of other things underneath the glass, not just a flower. So, I mean, even those little teeny tiny drops you see the flower in. And one of the tricks here is getting parallel and also making sure that you focus. I would say focus halfway between the top of the drop and where it is on the glass. And then the other thing I did here was stop down the lens. Like I think I'm probably at f99 here. No, not f99, f16. I wish we had f99 sometimes. Um, because I wanted maximum sharpness. And I mean, yes, you could maybe even focus stack here if you know what that is and how to do it. But using that small aperture helped get the flower sharp. And because that flower underneath the glass is far enough away, you're not seeing that much detail in the flower that's physically sitting underneath. You're only seeing the detail in the drops themselves. It definitely takes some practice, but I do this in all my workshops and everybody loves it. Here it is with this was a tablecloth for, I think it was just like a July 4th tablecloth. And I decided, what if I put that underneath there? And then you can use things like colorful ribbons and whatever and paper and just put that under there too. So the sky's the limit. In one of my workshops, there was a lady who slid herself under there and had her head, she was looking straight up, and we had her face in every little drop. So it was a little crazy, but it's fun to play around with. Anyway, any questions before I shift gears slightly here? I'm going to talk about a couple other things.
Well, we had a couple of comments. One person mentioned that Lensbaby also has a 28 millimeter velvet for a
Yes, they
wider
do.
view. And
Thank you.
I have a couple of Lensbaby, couple of Lensbabies, and I really haven't learned how to use it yet. It's
Hmm.
really, to get the focus that you want, you have to, I think you have to use it handheld most of the time.
Yes, exactly. And it helps to have a camera that has focus peaking on, you know what that is? Where you see like this little faint outline once something's sharp as you turn your focus. And that really helps you to focus. But yeah, no, I agree with you. It's not easy.
I have a 10-year-old camera. I don't have any of the bells and whistles.
Okay. Okay. That's okay. Yeah, it's hard, but
And
keep
then
practicing.
also, we were talking about using that Rain-X. We had another comment about should you use acrylic? Would it be safer?
You could, but it tends to scratch more. You see a lot of the scratches, and it's a little bit more reflective. And I'm not sure Rain-X will work the same way on that type of surface, but that's a good question. Experiment with it and see. Maybe buy a small piece and try it first, and instead of, investing in a large piece of acrylic.
Well, so far I've got a shopping list. I'm gonna have to get I'm gonna have to get a colored flashlight and some of that Rain-X.
Yes, yes. And then every time you walk in the dollar store, you will not see the store the same, right?
Right.
Places like that. There's all kinds of possibilities out there of subjects. Great.
Well,
Anything else or
I don't see anything else popping up.
okay, no worries. I'll keep going.
It is such a pleasure to hear a man talk about flowers. Um, I took a judging class a few years ago, and there was one of the people in the class, a male, and he said if he had saw a picture of a flower, he'd give it a really low score because it's a flower.
Oh boy. Wow.
So this is
Well,
a real pleasure to hear someone talk so reverently
oh, well,
about his
good.
subject. Okay,
Yes,
go
yes.
ahead.
Sure, sure. And many of my colleagues are male too, so they are just as passionate too about flowers. Anyway, all right. So there is this other thing that you could add to your shopping list. This is a little pricey, but it's a bundle, macro bundle that this company called Platypod makes, and it does come with um, the extreme is kind of the base, if you will, that you would lay flat on the table. This is for tabletop photography mostly. And then it has two Lumicube lights. And that's what I was referring to earlier. You don't have to buy this whole bundle. If you wanted to just buy one or two of those Lumicube lights separately, if you Google those, you'll find them, almost any camera store sells those. And those could be another handy way of adding light to your subject, in addition to that multicolor flashlight. Anyway, and then it has two pairs of goosenecks. So those are the bendable arms and you'll see the setup in just a second in the next slide. And then it has these little clamps as well. But anyway, here's how I didn't shoot this. I wish I did. Don Komarechka, if you're not already familiar with him, he's a Canadian photographer. He's best known for photographing snowflakes, and he has a wonderful book um, called what is it? The World at Our Feet or something like that. And he just came out with a new edition of that book. So Google his name and you'll see that book, but it's well worth reading. It's about an inch and a half thick, a really great macro book. But anyway, he lives in Bulgaria now. He used to live in Canada. His wife is from Bulgaria, and he still photographs snowflakes and other subjects like this. So what he did here was using the two arms and the lights and all of that. You do this setup and get your lens. You can see that little feather, and he's got the background as the flower, and then you see the distance there. It doesn't have to be very much distance, and he was able to get that bokeh or those rings of blobs of color in the background. And of course, his camera, it's not shown here, is above this whole setup, focusing on just the little feather thing at the top there. And of course, he sprayed it with water. But anyway, it shows you what this little kit can do for you if you wanted to get into detailed shots like this indoors. All right. And then you could also have a party with Mylar. So we think of Mylar balloons, of course, but you can also find sheets of Mylar. And I like the kind that has gold on one side and silver on the other. And I usually use the gold, just it gives it a warmer tone to the image. And you can take subjects and place them directly on the Mylar and get some really interesting reflections. Or you can add things like this vase of flowers up above the mylar and get that as a background to your subject. So these are really just for illustration, these slides here, but I'll show you in a minute. This is just showing where I'm using these paperweights to kind of crinkle the mylar. You don't always want to lay it absolutely flat on the table there. You can see more of the ripples and things if you crinkle it. And so this is a real messy composition and not a great shot, but it's just to illustrate here what you're going to see when you start looking through the lens. And you can start isolating pieces of the composition or simplifying it with fewer flowers. Here's just a single flower with the mylar reflection there. I could have taken this to the next level and sprayed the mylar with water drops if I wanted to. That would have been kind of interesting. But anyway, you can see the what's fun about Mylar. And then I also am sometimes inclined to purposefully defocus my lens. So in this case, I would have the lens wide open and I would purposefully defocus to the point where it starts to look blurred and you can still tell what shapes are there. And this is a great exercise just to try, even if you never, use any of the images you're going to make. But again, it's helping you see better, strengthening that visual muscle, helping you see shapes and forms and colors. much better than you might if you were just had the lens sharply focused. So anyway, that's just the Mylar itself, the reflection in the Mylar thrown out of focus, and another one like that too. So don't be afraid to defocus. That's my message there. And I've judged lots of contests, and yes, I agree, you need to have sharpness, but I would argue it's okay to have an image where not everything is tack sharp as long as it doesn't look like a mistake. That's the key. You want to have something sharp, usually for the eye to rest on, or have it so out of focus that you can tell it was deliberate, that the whole thing is out of focus. Anyway, that's my little soapbox on that. Um, you can also take the Mylar and make a tube out of it. So you would just cut out a square, and I'm using the glass stand again, you can see, to hold this backdrop up. And I've got the complementary colors, of course, the orange and the blue. And while I'm looking through the lens there, I'm using my left hand in this case to crinkle the Mylar a little bit while I'm looking through. Now, the key here is you need to have a wide angle lens. So you want to get a wide angle lens. So in my case, that 24 to 70, I could put that on and just have it at the 24 end. And I'm going to be using manual focus here when you're doing this. So you really do kind of need to be on the tripod for this. It's real high tech. You can use, masking tape to hold it there on the lens. So this is the kind of shots that you can make with this sort of setup, with this idea. You can see how when I'm crinkle the Mylar, it makes interesting shape. Or you don't have to crinkle the Mylar. This is the silver side of the Mylar showing on the inside, not the gold. So anyway, just something different to think about. And then you can also play around with, this is called a technique called cross polarization. And that is a piece of polarizing paper that you see there on top of this light box. So I think you can buy it like B&H and places like that. You can get a sheet, a single sheet, but it's not cheap. It's maybe $100 or a little more than $100. But you can use it and pass it along to your friends, and all of you can share it. But anyway, another thing the club could buy, right? Um, so you get the piece and you put it on a light box. Ideally, it really would be great if you do have a light box still laying around from the days of slides. And I'm just using that glass paperweight there to hold this down. And what you're going to put on top of that polarizing paper is something that's plastic, whether it's these spoons or any sort of cutlery, plates, whatever, the stuff that you'd see maybe at the dollar store that's clear plastic. It needs to be distressed plastic, and I have no idea technically what that means, but it works best with distressed plastic. And so when you put that on there and you put a polarizer on your lens, you do have to have a circular polarizer on the lens. It can be your macro lens in this case, or even just maybe a telephoto might work. And you'll get images like this. As you turn that polarizer, you can start seeing all these interesting rainbows of color. So this is just to show you, I was photographing the spoon just to illustrate as I turn the polarizer, all I'm doing is turning the polarizer, it's cross polarizing the light with various different colors there. And then here's another one I did of just a plastic plate. So anyway, again, training your eye. This is excellent stuff to try in the winter when we can't get outdoors. There's another one. Anyway, then you can also, if you happen to see a glass like this was actually, I think I got permission and bought this from a hotel once, or anyway, but it's got these bubbles in here, and I put the lens parallel to that bottom of that glass and was able to get the flowers reflecting in that there. And because there was a lot of reflective light, I just covered it with velvet to make it a little bit better than the last one was. Anyway, or you could even take something like an ashtray. This was an ashtray that had this cool design, and put that in front of the glass. So again, a lot of what ifing. What if I do this? What if I try that? Now this shell really needs to be retired, but basically, if you there are ways to buy, these Nautilus shells that have been sliced, and it's a wonderful subject. We're all drawn, I think, to that Fibonacci sort of shape there, with the spiral in architecture and otherwise. Anyway, so I have my back of my camera parallel to the shell. The shell's at an angle, And the back of that camera is parallel as it can be because in this case, I do want maximum sharpness. So I'm aiming at the shell and there's a lot of light spilling over. So I'm going to use that velvet cloth again. And I just filled the frame, with the center of that shell and tried to make a nice composition. I did use a little bit of the blue flashlight here also just to give a little different color there, kind of in the middle of it. So a lot of times the simplest setups can be, the most compelling images. And then in this case, I backlit the shell with the flashlight, and I'm using that extension tube there just to hold the shell in place. So anyway, you can see the idea there. And then you can also experiment with frozen stuff like leaves or flowers, organic materials, or maybe even inorganic you could try. But basically, you want to use distilled water when you're doing this. And in this case, this is just a Pyrex. And you put maybe an eighth of an inch of water, not much, in there and freeze it partially. And then when it's partially frozen, you bring it out and put these weights on top of it just to push the leaf down a little bit more and pour a little bit more water on there. Again, distilled water works best. And then you take it out, and in this case, I took it outdoors, and I've got my architectural block there that's clear holding up the Pyrex, and then I have a background there, the blue background. And then you can see I'm trying to get the back of the camera parallel to the Pyrex there. And I didn't have my lens hood this day. I needed it, so I just used my hand there to keep the lens flare from happening. But anyway, this was the final image there, and you can see what you can do there with frozen things. You can also put the Pyrex up against a window indoors. You have to work fast, if it's warm inside, it's going to start melting. But that's another way to just kind of get some backlight going on this type of thing. And then you can start photographing pieces of whatever's frozen too and get some interesting images that way. And then when the weather turns warmer, you could think about the garden hose. If you have images, so in this case, I've got these flowers. They're sitting on top of this trash can. I'm bouncing warm light in with that reflector, and you can see the cameras kind of behind me there. I'm making sure my assistant doesn't get me wet or the flowers. And basically, I'm just told her to hold the hose up and let the water, just fall behind the flowers. So what I did there was experiment with various shutter speeds. And what you can't see in this illustration is off to the left, there's some evergreen trees that are in shadow. So the key is having something that's in shadow and then the backlit sprinkler in sunlight. And so that way it makes all those droplets stand out, of course. And so this is the result of what I was seeing. And you can see with the different shutter speeds, the effects that I was getting. So that's 1/25th of a second. There's a quarter of a second, and then a thousandth of a second. So all kinds of different things you can play with there too. It doesn't take much to be entertained when you're doing macro photography, of course. All right, so I didn't want to leave you without at least touching on the possibilities with your smartphone. I'm using my phone more and more these days, of course, for all kinds of photography. It's not substituting for my big camera yet. I don't think it ever will, but it's handy to know that you can make close-ups like the following that I'm about to show you. Like all these were just made with the phone, two cups upside down on a piece of white paper. I was making tuna one day and looked down at the celery, and there was the celery. So it's always with you, you know. Another day I was making artichokes, and that was the oil in the water. So there's art in your life. That's another big message I wanted to get across tonight. Things that are happening right before your eyes that you might have missed if you didn't have a phone with you or something right away to photograph. This is just a leaf floating in a swimming pool made with the phone. And because that eyepiece is so small with a kaleidoscope, I was able to put the phone up to this kaleidoscope and get an image like this. So it's opening more and more creative possibilities for me, and especially with close-ups. This was, I would never sell this image, but I am drawn to that shape, and it was a piece of artwork that somebody did. It is copyrighted by the artist, but I just took it for my own personal enjoyment. And then here's another one of a flower. So you can get super close with especially the 14 iPhone 14 and up. You can focus pretty close and get some great close-ups. That was hoar frost here in Colorado one morning. Um, just rain falling down a rusty fire truck. That's all that one was. So again, it's training my eye too. There are some lenses for macro with the foam. One of the systems is made by a company called Moment, and they have a macro lens. They also have a fisheye lens that will focus less than an inch away from subjects. So that's something to think about if you're going to use an external lens. You do have to get their special case and their mount there if you're going to use that. But these are some others I made with the Moment lens attachment. This was a fisheye lens, and it allowed me to. This was in the Netherlands, and I was able to kind of get right inside the tulip. It almost felt like I was inside the tulip with that fisheye lens. It'd be pretty hard to do that with the big camera. Um, and then here's another. This is actually a lens kit that I've started selling that people like this kit just for the 15x macro. So they're interchangeable lenses on this little handle, but I like just putting that 15x macro on the end of the handle and putting it in my pocket. And then anytime I want to do a close up that's beyond the capability of the native close up camera in the phone, I'll pull that lens out and clip it over. It works on an Android phone too, and then you can get some close-ups that are pretty cool. So there's the 15x there. You can see, um, but that doesn't really illustrate kind of what it does. It gives you greater. These are some of the other lenses in that kit, but it gives you greater magnification than what the native camera does with the close-ups. So these are some that I did with the lens kit, just to show you what's possible. That I might not have been able to get these with just the straight macro in the. I mean, that's amazing. Just if you'd show me that image, like even 5 years ago, and said that was made with a phone, I would have been like, no way. The level of detail in that. And then there's an app that's only $1. I wanted to point this out too for those of you interested that you can get. And this one does have focus peaking that we were talking about earlier to help you focus closer. And it chooses which lens is best for your shot. But anyway, it's a app called Macro Plus. So these are some images I'd made with the Macro Plus app. That's just a leaf on a car window. So there's a whole world of macro waiting to be discovered, as if you haven't already discovered. These were all made with the phone. That was a piece of slate. Um, Using portrait mode in the camera, that automatically blurs your background. It's tricky to use it for close-ups, but I've found I can get pretty darn close with that. They tell you you have to be like 8 feet away from your subject, but that's not true, I don't think. Anyway, here's another one just with the using the 2x zoom on the camera, the native camera of this flower. That's using a piece of black plexiglass to reflect the flower there. So I hope this is inspiring you to, even if you don't want to mess with your big boy, big girl camera, at least dabble with macro, especially in the winter. Get some gadgets out of your kitchen drawer and, just play. Here's another one made. All these are made with the phone. I mean, the detail is just amazing. Anyway, all right. So this is an ebook I have that's available on the website. If you're interested, it does talk about all the gear you might want with macro and fill flash and all the setups. A lot of the setups I talked about tonight are in there. I do also have another ebook on the website, and this is the other topic. If you wanted me to come back and talk about this, is all about using your camera kind of as a paintbrush. And this is a very much a how-to book. Took a long time to write this, but walks you through all the steps of doing multiple exposures and some creative possibilities there. And then I do have these two pamphlets. My wife and I put these together that are kind of like cheat sheets, sort of, for the phone, talking about different apps and some of the places to tap on to get you to use them better. So all that's on the website too. There's some webinars. that are available for purchase as well on there. And then these are some of the upcoming workshops and appearances. There's a conference in Santa Cruz, California, where I'll be in March. There's a weekend workshop hands-on in April in Peninsula, Ohio, which is kind of near Akron, and it's the Cuyahoga Valley National Park there. It's through a camera club there, but people who are not members of that camera club are welcome to attend that. And then I sold out of the English Garden trip. That's happening in May, where we visit the Chelsea Flower Show and about 14 other gardens. It's one of my favorite tours that we do. And then I do have iPhone only workshops too coming up with Rad Drew. I don't know if you've heard of Rad Drew. He's an amazing iPhone photographer. He lives in Indiana. And he and my wife and I are doing, the three of us are going to teach at Madeline Island School of the Arts. And that may be sort of close to where some of you are up in La Pointe, Wisconsin, middle of Lake Superior. It's a wonderful experience. They have cabins and delicious food and classrooms, and it's a real immersive sort of experience for that one. We did it this past year and had 14 people on the wait list. So that one was a big hit. And then if you're interested in wildflowers, there's a place in South Africa where the most species of wildflowers bloom at the same time on planet Earth. And that's going to be happening in the summer. It'll be summer here in the northern hemisphere, but spring in the southern hemisphere. And there are only 5 spots left for that one. And then I'll be doing the same curriculum with Rad Drew of the iPhone stuff in California as well in October, if you can't make the one in July at Madeline Island. So it's going to be a busy year. And then looking ahead to 27, any of you interested in Namibia, we're doing a trip there as well. And you can email me about that. All these are on the website. And then I wanted to mention tomorrow evening, this is not going to be recorded, but it's a live presentation that Freeman Patterson's giving, all about the flora and ecology of Namaqualand, that area in South Africa. He's been there 46 times. In 2024, I went with Freeman. My wife and I invited us out there and showed us all the back roads and everything of where he gets these amazing flower photos. And I think he was trying to nudge me in the direction of doing this because he's stopped doing it himself, teaching there. And so I'm going to be doing, like I said, in August, that workshop. But anyway, this will be an opportunity to those of you who are, even if you're a botanist or a gardener or whatever, it's a great opportunity to learn about the various flowers in this region of South Africa. And Instagram does not know about this region yet. So there's the link to register for that webinar. It is free, but you do have to pre-register. And like I said, it's not going to be recorded, unfortunately. So if you want to point your phone and take a picture of that screen, that'll give you the link. You do have to register before 7 p.m. tomorrow night, obviously. And then if you want to get on my email list, if you're not already, there's a QR code for that. And I don't share with third parties. And then here's how to get in touch. So that's a lot. I tried to give you a lot of great information in a short period of time.
Well, I'm really, really thrilled that you were here. I really didn't know what to expect. And I mean, it's really opened my eyes to a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, I
You
think it's
know,
Yeah,
just been great.
it's
It
you know,
endless. Yeah,
it
you
is
know,
always interesting to think about how you can use such simple objects to do such amazingly creative work.
right.
And these are all doable. So
That's right. Yeah. The hope is that you'll just at least dabble in this,
yeah.
especially in the winter months.
To keep
well,
our sanity.
That's right. Yeah.
I like the idea of just playing with this, and coming up with, like you said, spend an hour with a flower.
Right. Yeah. And the next thing you know, an hour's gone by and you didn't even realize it. So,
Yeah.
and I can't wait to see what things you all discover, because I'm just touching the surface here.
Well, I'm gonna be sending out a call for images that people can send into the club, and we'll put up a gallery,
Great.
hopefully using some of these new techniques.
Yeah. Let me know when that gallery is finished. I'd love to look at that.
We'll do that. Yeah.
Great.
Great. Thank you
for
so
having me.
much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
So I guess unless somebody has any question, I'm going to end the meeting. We're getting a lot of things in the chat.
Oh, good.
Very positive comments.
Great. Yeah, it's hard. Sometimes this is what television broadcasters go through. You're staring at a camera. It's like,
Yeah.
is somebody feeding their dog? Is somebody are
Yeah,
people paying
people are
attention?
saying, great presentation, inspiring. Can't wait to try some of these techniques. Thank you for the inspiration. This was just a wonderful program tonight.
Well, good. Thank
Charles, thanks so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. And like I said, if you want to learn about the camera as a paintbrush, that's a whole other idea. Come back and talk about that. Maybe when the spring or summer rolls around, right?
Well, I think it's time to end the meeting. You have a good rest of the evening, and hope everybody else here will.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.